Imagine a vast, untamed wilderness stretching from one ocean to another, a land of towering forests, immense lakes, and sprawling prairies, home to thriving indigenous nations for millennia. This is the stage upon which one of the world's most unique national stories would unfold. This is the untold history of Canada, the story of how a frozen frontier became a global symbol of peace and diversity. Our journey begins long before the first European sails appeared on the horizon. For thousands of years, diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples developed rich cultures, complex societies, and deep spiritual connections to this land. They were the original inhabitants, masters of survival, and stewards of the environment. From the Haida on the Pacific coast to the Micmac on the Atlantic. Their stories are the foundational chapter of Canada's history. Then, in the late 15th century, the world began to change. European explorers, driven by a thirst for new trade routes and riches, crossed the Atlantic. In 1497, John Cabot, sailing for England, landed somewhere on the coast of what we now call Atlantic Canada. But it was the French who would establish the first permanent foothold. In the early 1600s, Samuel de Champlain, the father of New France, founded settlements at Port-Royal and Quebec City, marking the beginning of a new era. The French weren't just seeking land, they were after a different kind of treasure, fur. The demand for beaver pelts in Europe was insatiable, fueling an industry that would define the next 2 centuries of Canadian history. The fur trade created a complex network of alliances and rivalries, not just between European powers, but also among indigenous nations. French traders known as coureurs des bois and voyageurs paddled deep into the continent's interior, forging relationships with indigenous peoples that were crucial for survival and commerce. This period also saw the emergence of the Métis people, a new culture born from the unions of European traders and indigenous women, creating a unique identity that blended both worlds. But where there was profit, there was conflict. France's primary rival, Great Britain, had its own ambitions. The British established their own fur-trading giant, the Hudson's Bay Company, and founded colonies to the south. For over a century, North America became a battleground for these 2 European empires. The struggle for control culminated in the 7 Years' War. The pivotal moment came in 1759 on the Plains of Abraham, outside Quebec City. In a short, brutal battle, British forces under General James Wolfe defeated the French army led by the Marquis de Montcalm. Both generals died in the conflict, but the outcome was decisive. With the Treaty of Paris in 1763, France ceded most of its North American territory to Britain. Suddenly, a vast French-speaking Catholic population found itself under British rule. To avoid rebellion, the British passed the Quebec Act of 1774. This groundbreaking legislation protected French civil law, language, and the Roman Catholic faith. It was a pragmatic act of compromise that laid the groundwork for Canada's future as a bilingual and multicultural nation. It also unintentionally angered the American colonies to the south, contributing to the outbreak of the American Revolution. When the revolution succeeded, thousands of United Empire loyalists who remained loyal to the British Crown fled the newly formed United States. They migrated north, settling in Nova Scotia and creating the new colonies of New Brunswick and Upper Canada, which is modern-day Ontario. Their arrival fundamentally shifted the demographic landscape, reinforcing the British presence and creating a distinct cultural and political divide between Upper and Lower Canada. The early 19th century was a time of growing pains. Tensions with the United States boiled over in the War of 1812. American forces invaded, hoping to annex Canadian territory. But a coalition of British regulars, Canadian militia, and their Indigenous allies, including the legendary Shawnee leader Tecumseh, successfully repelled the invasion. The war didn't change any borders, but it forged a powerful sense of identity among the colonists. They weren't just British subjects. They were defenders of their own land, distinct from their American neighbors. This shared struggle was a crucial step on the path to nationhood. However, internal frustrations were mounting. The colonies were governed by small, unelected elites. By the 1830s, calls for democratic reform grew louder. In 1837, armed rebellions broke out in both Upper and Lower Canada, led by figures like William Lyon Mackenzie and Louis-Joseph Papineau. Though the rebellions were quickly suppressed, they sent a clear message to London. The status quo was unsustainable. In response, Britain sent Lord Durham to investigate. His famous report recommended two major changes. First, uniting Upper and Lower Canada into a single province of Canada to assimilate the French Canadians. And second, granting responsible government. This meant the colonial government would have to be accountable to an elected assembly, not to a governor appointed by Britain. While the goal of assimilation failed, the push for responsible government succeeded, marking a major milestone in Canada's democratic evolution. The mid-19th century was an era of incredible change. Railways were crisscrossing the land, connecting disparate communities and fueling economic growth. But political deadlock in the province of Canada, combined with the threat of American expansionism and a desire for a larger domestic market, pushed colonial leaders toward a radical new idea, a federation of all the British North American colonies. This led to a series of conferences in Charlottetown and Quebec City. A group of politicians, now known as the Fathers of Confederation, hammered out the framework for a new country. Men like John A. Macdonald, a charismatic and cunning lawyer, and Jacques Cartier, a staunch defender of French-Canadian rights, found common ground. They envisioned a nation that would stretch from sea to sea, a country built on compromise between French and English, federal and provincial powers. On July 1, 1867, their vision became reality. The British North America Act was passed, and the Dominion of Canada was born, uniting Ontario, Quebec, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick. It was a peaceful revolution, a country created not by war, but by negotiation and a shared desire for a better future. The new nation's first and most pressing task was to expand, under the leadership of its first Prime Minister, John A. Macdonald. Canada purchased the vast territory of Rupert's Land from the Hudson's Bay Company. But this expansion was not without conflict. The Métis of the Red River settlement, led by Louis Riel, resisted the transfer, fearing for their land and cultural rights. They formed a provisional government and negotiated the entry of Manitoba into Confederation as a province in 1870. A later resistance in the Northwest in 1885 would end tragically with Riel's execution, a moment that deeply divided the young country along French and English lines. To unite the nation and secure its claim to the West, Macdonald championed a transcontinental railway. The Canadian Pacific Railway was a monumental feat of engineering, built through treacherous mountain passes and across endless prairie. Its construction came at a high human cost, particularly for the thousands of Chinese laborers who worked in perilous conditions for little pay. But when the last spike was driven in 1885, it physically bound the country together from the Atlantic to the Pacific, fulfilling the national motto, Amari usque ad mer, from sea to sea. The journey from scattered colonies to a unified country was long and complex. It was a story of Indigenous resilience, imperial ambition, cultural compromise, and a relentless push for self-determination. From the first encounters in a vast wilderness to the driving of the last spike, Canada was forged in the crucible of conflict and cooperation. It was a nation born not in a single fiery moment, but through centuries of patient, difficult, and determined construction. The story of how this frozen frontier became a country is the story of Canada itself, testament to peace, identity, and the enduring power of perseverance. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey through Canada's history fascinating, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the stories that shaped our world. See you next time.